welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, December 23rd, Christmas Eve, and we have a great show for you today. We got to start talking about all of those first-round games that we saw this past weekend. A lot of blowouts. Let's be totally honest, all double-digit wins by all of the favorites this past weekend, but plenty of things to pull out from this, and including a couple of things about the losers that really stood out to me, and I'll break that down throughout the show. Then we'll get to some of the issues. A lot of people had a lot to say this past weekend, especially as that Indiana and SMU game are going on. I'll address that and why a lot of it is just downright ridiculous. But we'll get into that in time. We'll get into a little bit of a bowl wrap-up. It is still bowl season. Want to give some love where they absolutely deserve it. I'll lean into that. We'll go through them relatively quickly with a lot of them coming up this weekend. And then we'll do a little bit of a weekend updates. We'll do the transfer portal, coaching updates. We'll give you an update on the FCS playoffs, everything in between. So a lot of different stuff coming on today's show. And then we'll have to see you again all the way on Friday. So it'll be a little bit of a hiatus throughout Christmas. We'll be back on Friday to break down everything as we head into a huge weekend of bowl games. That'll be really fun to watch. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, get it to the top of the list, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, and that's the only possible with you guys. So anything you guys want to ask, especially about the games this past weekend, more than happy to answer them on today's show. But let's go ahead and jump into this, and we'll start with that. We'll pretty much start in chronological order. We'll start back on Friday night. We'll make our way through the weekend, and we'll start with those first two games. And we got to get into this one that happened down there or over there in South Bend, Indiana. Remarkable game. One of those games that it shows what Notre Dame is very much capable of at a very high level. This defense is an absolute problem, and don't let the score fool you here. Notre Dame rolled. They absolutely dominated this game. Obviously, Indiana was able to score 2 times in the final 90 seconds of this game to make it just a little bit interesting, but overall, they were absolutely dominant from pretty much start to finish in this one. They played incredible football, and the Notre Dame defense led the way, as you would have to imagine in this type of game. Indiana had absolutely no running room all night, 2.3 yards per carry, and the coverage was just incredible. Xavier Watts is an absolute problem on the back end. If you needed that confirmed to you, it was confirmed to you on Friday night. He is absolutely incredible, and he's one of those guys that if they can play relatively sticky coverage on the back end, he was going to give you a couple of chances. He's going to make a couple of plays throughout these games, and he's going to give you a shot against a backup quarterback in Gunnar Stockton that we'll talk about in time, I promise you that, but it's going to give you a shot in a game like that where you have to go up against a very experienced back end. Definitely a thing that Notre Dame is going to be hoping they can really rely on, but overall, a lot of different things that happened in this game, and really it started with this one. The 98-yard run from Jeremiah Smith opened this thing up, and it was Notre Dame pretty much from then on. They absolutely dominated pretty much from start to finish. Still some offensive issues that I think need to be ironed out. A couple of felt a little bit boom or bust in some respects. You know, Riley Leonard would make a big play downfield. Then they would get a little bit stagnant running the ball outside of this 98-yard run. They didn't run the ball all that well. Indiana did a great job fighting at the line of scrimmage, did a great job against this offensive line. Something to think about as we get into that Georgia game. But Indiana punting at the Notre Dame 49-48, down 17 is just insane to me. Not to say, he absolutely made the wrong decision, but you need a spark. You need a big play. I get it's 4th and 11, but at the end of the day, to win that game, you're going to need a big-time play that you weren't supposed to get. That was probably the opportunity you had. So, remarkable stuff from Notre Dame pretty much from start to finish here. Shout out to Marcus Freeman for getting his guys fully ready for this one. A little bit of a slow start, but after that 98-yard run, it was all Notre Dame. They absolutely dominated, and they move on to New Orleans. They face off against Georgia, and it's going to be a great one. It's going to be a really interesting one that a lot of people are going to pick Notre Dame in because of Gunnar Stockton starting. A lot of different questions around that one, and we'll get into that in time, probably on Friday, do a quick early look at that game. But the reasons Notre Dame won, D-line domination. I mean, it was incredible. Indiana had 63 yards on the day on 27 carries. Notre Dame had 10 tackles for loss. Curtis Wark just never really felt comfortable in the pocket. Riley Mills and Logan Thomas. Wow. It was absolutely incredible to watch those two guys go to work. Even with Howard Cross being a little bit limited throughout this game, they picked up the slack and were absolutely incredible. And now you get Howard Cross back fully for the next game, and that's going to be a huge piece for that defensive front. Then they set the tone. I think the big thing in this game that pretty much everyone was talking about as we head in, including myself, was if Indiana has a shot to win this game, if they're going to be able to come out on top in this one, they have to get up early. They have to hit that first punch. They have to make sure that they get on the board early and get up 7-0, get up 14-0. The second that he went 98 yards, the second that Jeremiah Love broke away, went 98 yards for a touchdown, and covered the ball at the end, something to keep in mind for all you running backs and wide receivers out there, that was it. Truly, that was it. And it's not to disrespect Indiana in any way, but the reality is, from that point forward, they dominated. They scored 20 of the next 23 points after that score, and this game was over. And Indiana, you battled back really late. I really enjoyed that because you gave us a little bit of a second where you thought, no way they're going to be able to pull this off. They weren't able to, obviously, but it shows you just how much fight that Indiana team does have. And then tight windows just all night for Curtis Rourke. He had no place to really throw the ball where he could feel fully confident. Obviously, you have Elijah Surratt. Obviously, you have a lot of these really talented wide receivers on the outside, but when they're playing sticky coverage like that, you're not going to get a lot of openings. And frankly, I thought there was going to be openings. I thought there was going to be a lot more openings throughout this game for them to hit big shots downfield, especially in one-on-one coverage. Never really came. It was really incredible from these back-end players, particularly the corners that had to deal with number 13, Elijah Surratt. So really incredible stuff from that Notre Dame defense especially, and then just enough from that offense, especially Jordan Faison, who someone we'll talk about in time as we move on throughout this tournament. But where do they go from here? What's the next step for these two programs? We know what Notre Dame's is, but for Indiana, I'm not here to bury Indiana. We'll talk about the craziness and people trying to bury Indiana here in a second in a couple of segments, but the reality is they had a remarkable year. They came up short on Friday. They were in a tough environment. They were playing a team that physically was just better than them. They came up short. That was pretty much the end-all, be-all there. I'm still very excited to see what they can do. If they can bring in Fernando Mendoza for that 2025 season, this thing could keep rolling on with Curt Cignetti. Have a ton of respect for him. Probably did a little bit too much talking before the game, but at the end of the day, I love the energy, and it was really, really fun to watch this team throughout this year. Cannot wait to see what they'll be in 2025. For Notre Dame, you move on to New Orleans. You find your way down in New Orleans, and you got to play UGA. You do get the backup quarterback, and Gunnar Stockton. They're going to be feeling a little bit better about their chances with that, but looking for got their first CFP win here. Looking to possibly knock off that team that has been kind of the class of college football the last little bit and move on to the semis where they might just play a Penn State or Boise State team that maybe they can beat them too. So a great win for Notre Dame to start this thing off, and a pretty dominant win despite only winning by 10 at the end of the day. Then we had this one. This was the most lopsided performance of the weekend, and Tennessee gave it a run for their money, but in my opinion, this was the most glaring lopsided performance of the entire weekend, and it started very early. Kevin Jennings made a ton of mistakes in this game. He was all over the place. The defensive line for Penn State against SMU's O-line might have been the biggest mismatch of the entire weekend. It was absolute domination from start to finish. Danny Dennis-Sutton was there pretty much every time. Zane Durant was plugging up the inside like a beast. And then Abdul Carter was Abdul Carter. He was going to be a problem in this game, and he absolutely was. SMU only had 58 rushing yards on 36 carries. It's not what they're used to by any means, especially with a guy like Brashard Smith back there. That is not a comfortable stat line for the SMU Mustangs. But Kevin Jennings got lost in the mess in this one. There's no doubt about that. There were a number of mistakes that he made that he does not normally make. He obviously floated the ball in the Tony Rojas pick six, had the mistake. The third pick, to be totally honest, is just Dom DeLuca making a play. If I'm being totally honest, that was an incredible play by Dom DeLuca, and not necessarily holding that one as aggressively against Kevin Jennings, but he got caught up. It was a big moment in a stadium that he has never played in before, a stadium unlike anything that he's ever played in before. He made some mistakes on the fourth down early. That was a huge play in this one. If they hit that play, if he hits him in stride and he scores a touchdown, or barring that, if he just takes the first down that I feel like he could have gotten with his legs, what happens in this game? Does SMU go up 7-0, and then Penn State gets a little bit tight? We'll never really know. He missed him by a little bit. They made a great play on the ball, and that was kind of all she wrote for this game. Really, really incredible stuff from this Penn State defense. And as good as they were, the Penn State offense left a lot to be desired. The run game was good. They had 189 yards, 4.7 yards per carry. Drew Aller was really inaccurate in this game. Only had 127 on the day, and obviously some of that is game plan stuff, some of that is flow of the game, so not holding that too much against him, but he's going to have to play better football going forward. Maybe not against Boise State, but definitely in a semifinal matchup and absolutely in the national title. He's going to have to be a bigger piece for them, and this offense is going to have to play better going forward. So they roll on. They get to play Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl, and it should be a win, but I don't think I have to tell you about Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. We'll break it down a little bit probably at the end of the week, take an early look at that game, but the reasons that Penn State was able to win on Saturday, I'm trying to get my day straight, they opened the gap early, and this was something we talked about with the Indiana game. It was much the same thing here. If you were going to fall into a 14-0 hole as SMU, you weren't getting close in this game. Let's just be totally honest. And they fell into a 14-0 hole with 2 pick sixes. So the crowd was into it. Everything was moving in Penn State's direction. They go up 28-0 at halftime and then coasted to the finish. They absolutely handled business, did exactly what they were supposed to do, and it really helped that they got up 14-0 very early in this one. And then line of scrimmage control. This was something that we felt like Penn State was going to be able to do. SMU's done a great job throughout the year of being able to run the ball and everything, but the reality of the matter is Penn State's just a little bit different than a lot of the teams that they've played thus far. So Penn State averaged 4.8 yards per carry. SMU only had 5 tackles for loss. On the other side, SMU averaged 4.7, but also had a couple of huge plays that really helped that kind of bump up. Not necessarily quite as good of a run day as it seems on that. And then 11 tackles for loss for Penn State. They were dominant. It was absolute domination, especially at the line of scrimmage, and that's what you kind of expected out of this game, and that's exactly what you got. And then they kept Kevin Jennings home. It's something that we've talked about on here with Anthony, my guy in the chat. We've talked about it a lot, where he said, essentially, if they keep him at home, if they keep his legs out of this thing, they're not going to win. I fully agreed with him. That's exactly what they did. The long carry of 6 yards is not going to be nearly enough to beat a team like Penn State. So remarkable stuff from this Penn State team, defense, especially that front seven to keep him at bay. And they move on. They find their way into a Fiesta Bowl matchup against Boise State. Going to be a very, very fun talking points as we head into that one. I'll leave it there for the time being. We will get into that one on Friday. For SMU, remarkable season. It was really, really incredible to watch this team. They jumped into the ACC, rode it all the way to Charlotte, came a little bit short in Charlotte, and you were outmatched in this one. It was just showed. There was no real debate about that. It was pretty clear from the jump. This was not SMU's day. It was probably not going to be SMU's day going into it. But I had a little bit of wishful thinking on this one, this one to be a little bit closer because I love SMU, love Kevin Jennings. It wasn't going to happen. I hate to say it, but Penn State was able to handle business the way that they probably should have in this game, and they move on to play Boise State in a game that they're probably going to be favored by more than they were in this one. So a lot of different things to pull out of those two games. Obviously, blowouts. Let's be totally honest. No, Ohio State was lopsided, but those were very, very lopsided performances. Notre Dame, while they only won by 10, they won by more than about 24. That was about the number that I kind of have around that game. And then Penn State, was just domination from start to finish. Obviously not what we wanted from those two games, and we'll get into that in a couple of segments, but we got 2 more games to get to. We got to talk about Texas just running over Clemson. We got to talk about Ohio State and what happened there. We'll talk about it here in a second after this break, so stick with us.